I should say, welcome everybody. Hangouts with James Fee. This is episode 3 of season 3. I got Mark joining me. This is, I think, your second time, right, Mark?
Yes, second time. I was just watching the 40th anniversary of Saturday Night Live, and I realized hosts are measured by how many times they've appeared. So this is my second. I'm moving up.
Yeah.
I think I'm ahead of Steve Citron Pusti, but maybe not.
No, he's got like 5 of them there because he's always my go-to when someone cancels at the last minute. And Steve
Yeah,
apparently never has a life, so I
yeah.
always know no matter when I need a guest, I can call him up, and in 2 minutes he's on. I think
Put in a coin, he'll talk.
I think Steve has had 3. Paul Ramsey or Steve has had 4. Paul Ramsey has 3, and then there's like 5 people with 2. So you've
Ah, okay. And I see you even there dragging out Ian White, whose last scene was at some far corner of the world doing something.
Yeah, he says that he is going. He's like, I'm in Nepal climbing a mountain, but I will be back that week. So it's an age-old story of man climbing mountain. I'll be back next week and we can hang out.
That might be a metaphorical mountain climb he's on. I'm not sure.
Well, with him, you never know, right? He's all into. Actually, not. He like stepped down, right? He's like president emeritus now of.
Why not actually?
Yeah, I think he's not day to day anymore. But I guess we'll find out. I don't want to assume I know anything about it, but I guess we'll find out next week.
That's good. I hope he gets good internet wherever he is.
Hopefully he's back here. I don't know if probably Nepal has better internet than we have here in the United States.
With one of those little satellite dishes on his head.
It'll be like a yak walking behind him. He'll be like, oh. So you gave me a pretty interesting list here of things that we should talk about, and I looked down at them. I'm like, not a bad list, but I'm going to go in a different order than you listed.
Okay.
I think we should just talk about Google Maps first. 10 years. I mean, I guess I was a little surprised. Were you surprised it's 10 years, or?
Well, no, it's funny because one of the things I've looked at is what Google's done, and back 10 years ago, I was working at Jakarta, and then the awkwardly named Telcontar, if you're really a geo historian. But we were the underlying platform for Google, so I actually remember a lot of those days fairly well because. They launched the product. They had it built on us. It was, it used Navtech and Teleatlas data at the time. Fairly limited scope, fairly limited functionality, and then just to watch it over time, add functionality and build and build and build. So I think it's love them or hate them. One of the most disruptive things in this industry, probably the most disruptive things in this industry, and really good product. I mean, it's hard to fault, I think, in a lot of ways. Though, they certainly disrupted a lot of the industry. So it's been an incredible run for those guys.
Yeah, they. It's one of those things where everyone, I think, initially assumed it would be interesting, but I don't think anybody of us knew that it would be as big as it is. That literally everybody uses this thing, and people to not use it, you have to go literally out of your way to use another map service.
Well, one of the things that they've done recently on their Twitter feed is they put out sort of historical clips, and I was watching one the other day, and it was like one of those short videos, 2-minute video of this is Google Maps, and the whole JavaScript, what now is called Slippy Maps, or was the Ajax thing at the time, that was all new. And before that, we were all on MapQuest, and you'd click the arrow and wait, it would index over 3/4 of a map. So, that was a big new thing, and I think that caught a lot of attention. And then, the other thing I think was single line search, because before that, if you were going to search for something, you'd put in the number and the street and the city, and, it would go in a very structured geocode. And they kind of came out and said, oh, here's this line, just, put in whatever you want. And man, that made geocoding a lot harder for a lot of people in the industry. And then, I remember when they added satellite imagery, and that just kind of blew everyone away, because satellite imagery till that point was an incredibly expensive thing to get. It was, very specialized, very small number of people, and they just thought, well, that would be kind of a cool thing. And they slapped it on there, and all of a sudden you had satellite imagery, and sort of blew. So I mean, and you just go down the line. And I mean, 10 years of just adding stuff. And frankly, I think it's interesting because right now they've built a property that is you look at the other guys who would like to compete with Google, and they have a very hard time figuring out, at least on the mapping side, how to go do that.
Yeah, we were talking about this the other day that when originally the map, remember when originally the aerials came out, you could only see the aerial or the map itself, the street view.
Yeah.
And people created those little hacks to overlay the data back and forth. It was
yeah, exactly. I remember, and there was that, and it was funny. It must have been 2005. They used to have the old Where 2.0 conference, and that O'Reilly ran, and I don't remember the sequence exactly, but Google had come out with their maps, and a guy named Paul Rademacher had hacked it and built the first housing map. And so he'd hacked some Craigslist housing data onto the Google Maps. And then, like, shortly after that, Google announced an API. And that was sort of, the first time I think any of us started using the word mashup was with usually the Google Maps API, I think. At least that's the first time I used it, which isn't probably indicative of anything. And so it became sort of, a big thing that you were going to mash up these things and mash up data with them and expose them to developer public and all that. And, the other things, I think of just so many things. Like, if you think back 10 years ago, it was pretty well known fact that no one would ever build another map database of the world. I mean, you had Navtech, which had done its. You had TelAtlas, which had done its. You had OSM, which was, real early days there. And I remember meeting Steve back in the day. And I'm like kind of this crazy British guy. This will never work.
what the hell does he know what he's doing?
Yeah, and everyone just kind of accepted as fact that no one would ever build another digital street map for the world. And then, Google said, yeah, we think we'll do it. And all of a sudden they're off and doing it. And certainly a lot of things changed. The way they collect data for maps has changed, and but it's certainly disruptive. And then probably the other thing that was hugely disruptive is before that time we all had this crazy idea that you'd sell your maps to people, and Google gave them away until recently, and that's obviously changed some. But they built it around an advertising model. So I think it's a pretty big milestone, and it's pretty hard to be in the geo industry without feeling like you've been impacted by that, for good or bad.
Yeah, as a developer, I look at the API itself as being something that has greatly affected how I do work. Back before then, you had these crazy C and .NET and Java libraries you added. It was complex. It was, you had to write apps, and and all of a sudden, Google's like, it's a simple API. Just use it. 2 lines of code, and you got a map. It was like literally unheard of.
Yeah, and I think that's. I think there's still more to be done there, but I think that was where all of a sudden, it's funny because so when I started in location, back in the old days, not going to sound like the old dude. I started. Literally, I was working in GPS for Trimble, and you'd say, people say, what do you do? And you say, I do global positioning satellite systems and all that. And they kind of look at you and look for someone else to talk to in the room. And so as GPS kind of moved along, then all of a sudden maps brought it to where this is something real, and all of a sudden everyone got it, and developers got it, and so I think it's been a hugely interesting thing. Certainly, it's made it interesting for all of us who sort of toil away in this weird corner of the world. I think at some point you kind of wonder, and there was something I think when they bought Waze. What was that? Actually, that was the last time I was on. Was right about when they bought Waze. And everyone was sort of scratching their head and saying, "Why are they buying Waze? And why for that much money? They've got all these assets." And I think the answer was because they could, and there wasn't really anyone else out there to compete with them. And that's I think the interesting part, and maybe not the good news for the community is this industry needs more innovation besides what one company can do, and it needs to be challenged and pushed.
Well, I think it also has sort of allowed us to have that innovation, right? I'm not sure that companies like Mapbox would exist today if Google hadn't funded this type of mapping system. We would probably be more of, who knows, it wouldn't necessarily be Esri, but that type of company that an IBM or somebody.
Yeah, and I think it took, and speaking somewhat from painful experience, it took a bit of a cycle because they went through and really developed a lot of. 10 years ago, one of the things that was really an issue was, being very conservative of memory and being very conservative of processing power. And Google sort of brought a whole new approach to it. It's interesting. One story I've told this story before, but back in the day, Telcontar was the platform under Google Maps and also Yahoo Maps, and historical fact, those two were pretty even at the time. Yahoo actually had a mapping platform, and it was about as good as Google's. They're about the same. It was interesting because as we worked with them, within Yahoo, that was always treated as a P&L. It was under their local search P&L. So the general manager of that, if he added something, would have to figure out how to make money off it. He had this very tight span of control, and if he added a feature like satellite imagery, which was going to cost him money, he'd have to figure out how to make money off that. Whereas Google was this sort of, where do you go do cool things? A guy named Brent Taylor, who later was the CTO of Facebook, was a product manager. And the sense you got was they would just go do stuff because it was kind of cool. And there was someone, like in a building over there, somewhere on the other side of the campus that was making money, and we were spending it, and they were making more than we were spending. And so life was good. And so they just did things that built great user experience without really giving a concern for, for like making money off everything. So I think it was really, a phenomenal thing for the industry. It's left a lot of people scratching their heads. Apple's obviously got some work going on now, but it's left a lot of people scratching their heads. I think, the Apple conundrum was this is an expensive and hard thing to do, but on the other hand, we don't want to be dependent on our biggest competitor, so we've got to go do it. And I think that's a conundrum that a lot of people in the industry still have.
Yeah, so we're sort of left with what? We're left with hard. Well, I don't say hardware because Google's not hardware, but OS providers that make maps. So Apple and Google, and then maybe Microsoft in here for a little bit. But where does that leave? Where does that leave here? Where does that leave TomTom, TeleAtlas, and all these other providers?
Well, so if you kind of break it down, you've got Google, obviously building their own map, and I think, one of the things probably everyone knows, that was not done for economic reasons. That was done really strictly for product flexibility reasons, the ability to create and improve the map data at their pace and in their direction rather than relying on other people. And I think that's given them a lot of advantages. You've got Apple. Obviously using a number of map providers, primarily TomTom. And I don't know if this is a controversial thing or something everyone yawns and says, yeah, we all do that. But, it appears to me that Apple is building their own map database. We can talk about that if you want. And then you've got, Nokia here. I think they're kind of an interesting play. They had a lot of disruption about 6 months ago. Michael Halber left. And if you look at what Nokia is doing from their corporate pronouncements, they've really come out and said we're going to focus on automotive, which is a huge source of their revenues and profits. And also, I think they believe a place where higher accuracy, things like ADAS and lane guidance, and moving to self-driving cars and all that, will really value high accuracy digital street maps, and they see that as an area they can do well in. They said they wanted to be an enterprise, which I don't exactly understand that. I suspect they think that's a low-hanging fruit. And they said words were something like, we want to be in select commercial environments, which I think means they want to hold on to Microsoft, Yahoo, Samsung, Amazon, Baidu, a handful of the big guys. But they pretty clearly said, or by lack of saying it, they weren't saying we're going in an all-out, going after developer strategy. It's going to be pretty selective. So I think that starts to leave a lot of space in the market.
Oh, it looks like people are saying your sound is bad. You got earphones?
Yeah.
See if that fixes it. It was, it did just get bad all of a sudden. It was weird. Sunspots. Oh, look at you having all fancy
Yeah,
Mine's like plastic. Yours is like.
So an embarrassing thing is these actually were bought for me the last company I actually worked for. So they're probably that generation.
We should have Bluetooth ones now. No, I got this crazy cable that's like 10 feet long.
Sorry about that, folks. So that's
Just a little pressure to get it done, right?
Yeah.
There we go. Is that better, everybody? Someone say yes in YouTube. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. I think it sounds good. We'll just assume you're fine. So let's think about this for a minute. So you worked at Jakarta, and I don't know what kind of thing, I don't know if you can actually talk about what happened, but let's just think about it on a larger scale. So you mentioned Jakarta was essentially working with everybody of note, and now they're not. Is that just a natural progression of how this goes, or are there things companies like Jakarta can do to survive in that kind of world? I mean, I guess Google and Apple want to control the whole thing, so maybe that's my answer right there.
I think, does this sound better?
Yeah, everyone's agreeing you sound much better.
Okay, good. I think that Google, for a long time, Google was innovating faster, investing higher, building more stuff, and frankly, out innovating everybody in the market. And selling against that was super hard. I mean, and I'm sorry, and they were giving it away for free. So you were in that coveted quadrant of best in the world and free, and it's just real hard to compete against that. I think a couple things are starting to happen out there, and one and this has been, say, over the last 2 years, is one, it got a little less free, right? So they started charging for people. Two, I think Google is not they have designs in a lot of markets, and you see them. Last week they ramped up what they were doing in hotel search, and so if you're in a company doing hotel search, then all of a sudden you really scratch your head and think about, do I want to be using my competitors' maps? And so there were a lot of different things that happened. And I think the other thing is that people started wanting different things. I mean, you just want something different, and you want something that's not the same as everyone else's. You want to show some creativity. And so I think there's been a range of different things moving on that. So so that starts to build demand for an alternative solution. And you can leave aside a question there about what is that alternative solution.
Yeah.
Nokia, I think, came in and they said we are that alternative solution. And going back to like what Michael Halber was saying when he was there, we're the Switzerland of maps. We'll let you have your own business model. We've got a good platform. We're not your competitor. We'll private label it, and that's, I think, was their message. And they went out pretty effectively, I would say, to a lot of the really big guys and got them signed up on that. I think the challenge, and then TomTom. If I look at TomTom, I think struggles and is in a little bit of a tough spot. And I think part of the problem is they're challenged financially, and so they can't invest at the level that Google or even Nokia is investing. And so I think that makes it tough for them. But they do have a map database of the world. They're worldwide. They've got some good businesses. I think they've got some financial challenges on that.
They're still working with Apple right now, right? Or at least at some level. I mean, obviously, we don't know how deep.
Well, no. I mean, I think. So Apple lists their map suppliers, and it's a fairly big list. But I think TomTom is certainly the dominant source. They use local regional sources. I think they use Zenrin in places and a variety of other guys, and they use OSM. They don't exactly say where they're using what, but TomTom's certainly the big provider there, and that's got to be one of their bigger accounts. And then TomTom also does a lot of automotive business, and about 4 months ago, they announced that they were offering a service. I think one of TomTom's biggest handicaps has been they don't have a cloud-based map service. And they announced that with a rather cryptic line about, as part of this, we've expanded our relationship with Jakarta, which I read to mean it's built on Jakarta. I mean,
Yeah,
that's what that means. So, it was a rather cryptic sentence in the but they'd been building their own for a long time. I mean, back when I was at Jakarta, they told us they were building their own platform, and apparently that didn't go so well.
Yeah, well, eventually you have to give up, right? We'll use yours. But Apple is not giving up, right? They seem to be really trying very hard. I mean, to get to Google. Now, trying to reach to Google Maps is tough because they're such a big lead, and they're still moving at such a fast pace.
Yeah.
Saw this news, was it a month ago, a couple weeks ago, they had the cars that they're now driving down the street.
Yeah, that was hot news out here in the Bay Area.
Yeah, so they've got some ugly minivans that they drive.
Yeah, so people didn't see that. Spotted on the street were these Dodge Caravans with some, wild technical array of stuff on top. And someone went and looked up who they were registered to and somehow traced it they were registered to Apple or something like that. So that's set off a range of speculation, some uninformed and some more informed. But I think what some of the more informed people said is what they got up there is they've got some precision GPS, they've got some LiDAR, they've got some wheel tick sensors. And so people said, oh, it's, then it fed into the whole Apple's building their own car thing,
yeah.
which I'm not sure I make that leap. But, it clearly looks like a map data collection van thing, right?
It sure does, doesn't it?
It's got GPS, it's got LiDAR. And, so I made the comment, and Apple obviously probably is not going to hear me here and confirm or deny this, but, if you look at Apple, obviously there was the problematic launch. And then I think Apple went into probably a year where they said almost nothing about maps, right? And that was the, we're fixing stuff. And then about a year ago, and the last year, they bought about 5 or 6 different companies. And there were some back-end companies. There was a Hopstop, which was a transit company. They bought Wi-Fi Slam. And I'm forgetting a couple others. But I thought that was interesting because that, especially when they bought Hopstop, because that said, hey, we feel like we've got the back end fixed enough that we can start expanding features, right? We're going to start building transit. We're going to start doing some of this stuff. So that, to me, was indicative. Meanwhile, you look at the hiring there, and both, if you go to the website and put in maps or geo or whatever, and I mean, they're like 50 recs for people. Plus, you look at some of friends and friends who are over there. They're hiring good people. And it's, and one of the things is, I would argue 4 years too late, they decided Maps actually takes good, smart, fairly big teams, and that's what they're building. And so they're building, they've got a lot of people in there, and then you look at, the van, plus you look at some of those recs, the job recs of what they're doing, and you say, those guys look like guys who are probably putting together map databases. And then you think of it from a strategic standpoint. I don't think that Apple wants to be dependent on outside data sources for too long if they're making that big an effort. And it turns out they probably have the cash to go invest in it if they want. So, so that's my guess. I don't know. If I were a betting man, I would say. At some point their dependence on outside map data suppliers is going to diminish, and they're going to ramp up and eventually have their own Apple map data. And so, from 5 years ago saying no one would ever think about building their own map database, looks like we'll probably have at least 2 more private, and then put OSM in there, which is I think a huge amount of potential, and you've actually got a pretty interesting market.
Yeah, I mean, from Apple's standpoint, I've noticed with iOS 8. Previously, you used the search bar, it would return, I mean, if you had it set on Google, it would return Google results, right? So if you start typing something restaurant, it would start auto-completing and you get the Google results. Now, you start typing a location, and Apple throws in, off their map database, the point to click on to go to their maps. Now, their maps are not as good as Google, so it's, I wonder if they're getting some feedback here, and they've just, they keep wanting to do this more integration, and every time they do, it's people are like,
Yeah.
it's wrong.
It's a tough, and I talked to a lot of people who were, let's put them in the category of, they're in sort of the Google size category, right? So these are big internet platforms, and a lot of them would like to have something of their own that's a property around, around maps, and so you say, well, what do you have in mind? And they go, well, we like what Google has, and it's like, well, okay. So Google started in 2004, right? And they've invested, billions of dollars and hundreds and thousands of people over that 10 years. And actually, I have a chart I drew once where I slotted in like the innovations that Google has had over time, with time, and just like they did this and they did this and did this. And so now in 2015, sorry, I'm moving off the screen, you've got this, Google's at this point 10 years later of capability, but it's taken them 10 years to get there. And so then, you say, well, think about that from Apple's perspective, right? So Apple bought PlaySpace in, I think, 2008, and they plugged away for 4 years and launched something that clearly wasn't at the Google level. But it takes some time, and it takes, it's hard to get there quickly. And so I think that's a daunting challenge if you're sitting here in 2015 thinking, gee, we might want our own map platform. Question is, how are you going to get there in any sort of reasonable time? So.
Yeah, it's tough too. I mean, you said a very good point. When Apple came out with Maps, everyone's like, "Oh, this stinks," and it's like you have to sort of think, what was Google Maps like?
Yeah.
Maybe not the first year, but maybe in the first 3 years.
Well, at a very simple level, I mean, Google. If you think about Google Maps, it was built with other people's data. It was built on someone else's platform, and what Google built that was really innovative was the the top layer, the stuff they got from Lars Rasmussen and his brother, which was the Ajax Slippy Map thing, the thing that we can now call Slippy Map, and that was a big innovation, and it was just U.S. So I mean, they started with a very much smaller problem set, whereas by the time Apple came out, that was sort of the target. And I guess the other critique I would make from Apple is I think what they didn't spend enough, and they wasted too much of what they spent on the whole 3D imagery thing, which, A, they didn't do it very well. B, it's not something people really use that much, right? I mean, I think they were trying to go after like a Google Earth kind of effect, and Google Earth is a really cool product, but I mean, I don't use it that much.
I mean, on a mobile device, you're using maps for a couple things, right? You're looking to just find a place near you, or you're trying to navigate someplace, and neither of those things requires some sort of 3D. They always try and come up with how you can use 3D to see what buildings are around you, and it's like, give me a dot, and I can, if I'm in 5 feet of where I am, I'll figure out, oh, there's the Starbucks, it's right there.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think that they and they bought Poly9, which was a little imagery company. They bought a bigger company called C3 out of Sweden, if I remember correctly. But they weren't spending enough money, and then what they did spend, they spent a lot on that, and that I just think it was misplaced. But on the other hand, they've certainly come around. They're hiring good people. They certainly are making big investments, and they certainly got the money to do it, right? I mean, it's everyone always wonders if they're going to buy TomTom to get the data, and I don't know. I'll say they won't, and then they will tomorrow, and I'll be wrong. But I think if they were going to do it, they would have done that a while ago. I mean, it's not that they hadn't thought of that. Right?
If they needed them, they would have bought them. But they obviously, I mean, Apple's one of those companies, when they need to own something, they own it.
Yeah. Although if you look at it, they tend to buy small companies. I mean, they very rarely, and I think maybe part of what goes into that decision is, I don't know that TeleAtlas is a great cultural fit with Apple. They tend to like to buy small companies. So.
Yeah. Ones they can dominate. Throw a couple guys out and not worry about who their boss is.
I mean, they figured they're going to redesign the front end. They're going to give it the channels and the market and all that kind of stuff. So what they really are interested in is smart people who worked on interesting technologies. And you kind of look down at who they've bought, and they all tend to fall in those categories. With a few exceptions, they tend to be companies that are small, didn't necessarily have a lot of market traction, but had a good, smart team and good progress along some problem they're interested in.
Yeah, and so we've talked about Google, we've talked about Apple, we've sort of talked about TomTom and here, but then there's the other ones like the map boxes or the CartoDBs,
Yeah.
They're sort of taking OSM data and kind of making it easier to use, cleaner, more interesting than the typical OSM data. Do you think we'll see more of that? More companies just saying, you know what, we don't have the ability to create our own map. We'll just use something that we can through a license and then sort of wrap it around some of our special sauce to make it more interesting.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm real big on open geodata right now, and part of that might be just out of I don't see I don't see many other options, but also part of it is I think what it could be, and I think there are a couple issues. One is the things with the commercial data providers is not just that they charge you money, but they also inflict business terms on you that can be very hard to innovate. And the basic model that the mapping guys have driven historically has been a usage-based model that charges differently for different usages. So if you use it for thing A, I'll charge you this. If you use it for a different way, I'll charge you a different way. And the problem in the market really for the last 10 years has been the market has innovated way faster than the pricing models at Nokia or TomTom have allowed. And so if you're working on those data systems, you're always sort of working, you're trying to get them to come up with a new pricing model or something like that. And meanwhile, on the other hand, Google controlling their own thing just kind of does it if it's cool. In fact, when Google came out with their new maps, and their new maps change as you zoom in and out, and they're tailored to you, and if you search for something, it'll show a night. It's like a little more personalized. They did this 1.5-minute video to show you that, and I looked at that and I said, if you were getting billed for that on a transaction model, that would cost you like 58 transactions for that little basic look at a store. And so it's not just the cost of it, it's sort of the license restriction. So anyway, there I start coming out and saying, so it's got to be open. It's got to be open, and that's where I think a lot of the real innovation is going to be around that. And the OSM's got its issues, but I think that's the great hope.
Yeah, I wish I could remember who it was and where it was, but I remember this person said something interesting to me. He said that it's almost like you like to use Mapbox to be that middleman between you and the nightmare of OSM. If you don't understand how that community works and you come in from the outside, you're thinking, these guys are nuts. They're worried about every little thing. Whereas if you just use Mapbox's maps, that you're sort of abstracting all that away, and Mapbox deals with OSM Foundation, everything else, and you just deal with Mapbox's tiles. So you get that open data in sort of a closed kind of API that it's like a hybrid thing. It's sort of like, makes you feel comfortable not having to deal with downloading diffs and dealing with postcards and such.
I mean, I think that's part of it. I mean, certainly the political actually, I would say two things. And we were talking a little bit before. I was talking to a large company that was sort of interested in participating in OpenStreetMap, and they asked what I thought. I said, OpenStreetMap's a great project. It's really a great project. Don't read the
don't sign up for any news email news blast.
Don't pay attention to OSMF. Really, sorry to my friends around the OSMF board, but I mean, there's so much backstabbing, and frankly, I think the frustration is that OSMF is too often got itself into the place where they're just trying to figure out governance things and infighting and that kind of stuff. But the project, and the reality, they had this special election a little while ago, and I think 100 people voted in it. So that kind of says, I mean, if they were a union, they'd be decertified, right? But I mean, I think the project is great. I think the OSM U.S. organization does really good work. The State of the Map organization, is a great thing. So I think I would hope people wouldn't be frightened off by that, because I think the project is really good, and I think there's some structural problems with it. I think one of the things that I see in a lot of the arguments about OSM is that there's no one authority that says this is what OSM is, and so we all have our opinions. You have an opinion, I have an opinion. they're just opinions. You know, it's like I can't say you're right and I'm wrong, and I think that's really hinged on a couple key issues. I mean, I think there's a strong faction which really believes very firmly that OSM is about the community, and you don't want to do anything to OSM that hurts the community. And there's another faction that believes OSM is about the map. We want to foster the community because it helps the map, but we also are really about building a map that works for commercial use. And those are two valid viewpoints, but they would lead you in different paths as you think about it. And there's no one really to break that tie that I've seen yet. So.
Yeah, interesting.
So, but like I say, I think it's the hope. But the other thing you were talking about, you mentioned Mapbox. I think the thing when I look, and in case people don't know, I have an affiliation there. I'm on the board, so take that with that grain of salt. But I think not just the sort of taking OSM and bringing it into a usable format, but the level of control they give people. And I think the things as people go forward is, we're dealing with, compared to like when I got into this business, which was, gosh, I guess it was 10 years ago, we're dealing with a lot of different data source types. I mean, we weren't dealing with nearly as many data types 10 years ago as we are now. And, I think Esri was, but most people in the consumer world weren't dealing with that. And now we're dealing with tons of different data and growing every day, and how do you visualize that? And we're also dealing with different infrastructures and different ways of storing and processing data and things like that. And I think that's the platform that becomes really pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's it. Well, location is so interesting. I mean, not just because we care about it, but where people are, what are people doing?
Yeah.
I mean, we were just talking about this the other day on the phone app. I don't know what iOS changed iOS, but it now asks you, hey, so-and-so app wants to share your location in the background. This thing always comes up. You're thinking, gosh, every app that I use is sort of tracking where I am.
Yeah.
You don't know why. I mean, some of it they're using it because they want to see if you're moving around, so they refresh push feed. But it sort of makes you start wondering, and probably especially on the Android platform where things are a little more wide open, that what really is being collected about me and what's being shared. There's that black area that you don't really know. But let's talk a little bit about the organized method. So we're talking about Apple or Google tracking you. We're talking about your phone provider tracking you, or using something like Foursquare to track you. Where do you think that's going right now?
Well, the big thing is persistent tracking, and whether Facebook just announced their Places tips, right, and which is sort of a copy of what Foursquare had done. But the idea is you go into a place, you walk by a place, or you dwell at a place, I guess, and they say, hey, are you at Joe's Bar? You should try the onion rings or something like that. And so it's that anticipatory, we know where you are, and so we're going to push something to you rather than wait for you to pull out your phone, dial up Yelp or Foursquare and say, what's good here. But yeah, clearly that, that starts to go to, collecting that location information and using it. And you've actually got a fairly vibrant market right now for people collecting user location data. And so from my experience, what I've seen is that user location data is very interesting. They like it tied to device identifiers, so something like the UFA on Apple, or I can't remember what Android calls it, but basically it's the advertising identifier that identifies that device. They actually don't want personal identifying information. They don't want to know this is James Fee who lives at 123 Maple Street in Tempe, Arizona. They actually don't want that, and I think that's because if they get that, there's a lot of different rules and restrictions on what they can do with it. But out of that data that comes, there is, they will go and derive audiences that advertisers want. And so, for instance, if they see that, I live in Palo Alto, I spend my work days up in San Francisco, I go to the mountains on the weekends, I show up at Costco, and right now I happen to be on the auto lot for a a Tesla lot or something. That is hypothetical, right? Then that's very interesting information, right? They can put me in an audience. Advertisers like that stuff,
Yeah.
and there's a very, it's interesting. That market has evolved literally month to month in terms of people sort of understanding the value of that data, people trying to procure it. So it's a pretty interesting evolving market.
Yeah, it sort of makes me think about satellite imagery, right? Because we see a lot of that now as being instantaneous, so they can analyze where people are. So you can see that, hey, people are milling around the outside of the Super Bowl, and I don't remember which company it was, but they were showing pictures of the mob, the parking lot filling up, and then the people mobbing to the entryway, and then they go into the University of Phoenix Stadium here, and then they come out, and it was really weird to see that.
Yeah.
It's a more analytical process. Not necessarily, as you say, they don't know who each one of those individual people are, but they can pretty much programmatically put a dot in each head and figure out, hey, there's 100,000 people in that parking lot.
Most of what I've seen has been, the other thing that I think some of the folks who've worked in this have discovered is, sad for our egos, the advertisers don't really care where Mark and James are. The idea, one of the things I think that is interesting about location is everyone has a sense of location, and so when they say, how would location be used in advertising, they all have an idea, right? And that idea 9 out of 10 times involves a Starbucks and a coupon being thrown at you as you walk by, right? So that's, and then what they find out is that's actually kind of stupid. It doesn't work, and it's annoying. It doesn't work. And you can't throw enough Starbucks coupons at people walking by Starbucks to make any difference. And who cares, because you can't swing a dead cat in any urban center without hitting a Starbucks. But what they're very interested in is being able to advertise to millions of people. And what a lot of these companies are doing is using location as a signal, along with a bunch of other signals, to say, you want to talk to 5 million college-age females, who are looking at buying a car. Here's the places to go get them, and that is audiences that advertisers can spend against, and it gets very interesting. So I think there's a lot of work being done on that, and companies doing well in that market. I mean, making money, which is not always the case in the location business.
Yeah, especially in the ad business, right? I mean, there's Google and maybe one or two others that actually make money selling ads. The rest of them are struggling to find placements.
But it's interesting, and I mean, one of the things that we're seeing is the value. So when you talk to people in advertising and say, are you interested in location-based advertising? A lot of them will say yes, and then you kind of dig in and they go, well, we mean like the zip code or DMA, or like you're in the Bay Area, and so what you really have to do is say, are you interested in like precision location? But that number is growing, and people, the guys at Think Near at Telenav, and the guys at Place IQ, and there are a number of others, they're really coming out with some pretty good data that says location can really improve the value of your ads, and they're doing quite well on that stuff. So it's and there's a bit of a creepiness factor. There's a bit of a privacy issue. But on the other hand, the internet is an ad-driven space by and large, and I think if they can figure out how to do it without crossing lines more effectively, it's going to happen.
Well, yeah, and we also have to realize, I mean, most of what we use on the internet is completely free. I mean, Google Hangouts right now, Google doesn't charge me a dime for this, and if I were to use one of the commercial providers, I'd be paying hundreds, if not thousands, of dollars a month. For it. So I think people are, to some level, they're accepting of trading information about them for something free. It's probably not. You remember those late 90s? They had those free PCs you'd sign up for, and they give you a free PC, and then ads all over the place. Maybe not to that extent, but.
Yeah. Well, and it's been, like Nordstrom's got a fairly well-publicized case on indoor location, and, they're tracking people around as they walked indoors. And Nordstrom's got a lot of flack and actually pulled the technology out. And, so I think the implementation is got to be careful and all those kind of things. And like I say, most people really don't care about individuals; they care about audiences and things like that. So, but it's certainly started to drive a whole dimension. You were talking about location remains an interesting place. We were talking before. I've been doing this now for 6 years, and I kept thinking it would everyone would figure it out. They'd go,
this is not special. I mean, anyone can learn it. Dot on a map, for peace sake. How hard is it?
But it keeps evolving and it keeps changing. And I think part of it is that the way people think they're going to use location initially turns out not to be right, and so they have to go through a process until they figure out what does work.
Yeah, and you sort of see these things happen in places that you wouldn't think. I was actually at San Francisco for a Giants game, and AT&T, AT&T Park there. They have all those Apple beacons now. So when you walk around, it knows, hey, here's the menu, here's how you purchase the food here. Maybe that's how this stuff, because that is that's something that I want, right? When you're at a place with a lot of people, you sort of want, you want to be able to do that. Whereas the Nordstrom example, you want to sort of keep your mouth shut. You don't want anyone to know you're actually there to buy anything, because the minute you do, someone's going to try and sell you something.
Right. Yeah.
So
and
probably that.
I think that's and that I think, and I'm not going to be an apologist for the advertising industry, but I think what the advertisers would say is, if this is going to be ad driven, wouldn't you rather have good ads rather than crappy ads, right? Wouldn't you rather have ads and offers for things that are valuable to you rather than things that aren't? They're going to have to figure that out, and it's certainly the data crunching ability gives scary potential, and so they're going to have to go figure that out as the NSA is figuring it out too, I guess.
What do you think the aspect of the Android Wear and the Apple Watch has on this kind of stuff? Because you've got your location tied to what your watch is.
Well, I think there a number of different dimensions on that, including the advertising thing. I think apropos of a comment I made before. The whole sort of sensor movement, what's happening with sensors, is just driving a huge amount of data, which is going to be location tagged, and that's what going back to the question about the opportunity for guys like Mapbox and CartoDB and things like that, is there is so much more location data that's going to be out there. And is coming out there now as a result of all these sensors, and that to some extent needs to be processed, understood, visualized, and those kinds of things. And so I think that's really going to be a huge opportunity for many of those guys.
It's probably a little scary too. I mean, let's just take the Apple Watch for example. We know it has some sort of metric to track your health on it. Can you imagine seeing a little Amazon ad appear? It says, "Hey, it looks like you're having a heart attack. Would you like to buy some aspirin?"
That's but it's funny. I think the Onion a few years ago wrote a very good article. If I remember right, the CIA was declining funding because basically all the investigation they wanted, or the FBI, was being done by people volunteering it on Facebook or something, and we're essentially signing up for these things to give away a lot of information. So
right, you don't have to go anywhere. You just look at Twitter, and there.
Well, having said that, so an interesting thing. Having said that, Google used to have what was it called? It was a location tracker where you could look back and say, where have I been for 30 days?
Oh, yeah, I do remember that. Yeah.
I remember that. They stopped it, I believe. But I do that because I do that with all these things, and I figured my life's not that interesting that anyone wants to know. But I had to go. I was in Australia, and I was giving a presentation, and so the presentation was I showed that slice from 30 days, and I started at a very small scale, zoomed out, and I zoomed in on different things, and just asked the audience who'd never seen me before what they knew about me just based on where the dots were on the map. And it's pretty scary. They listed 20 correct things from that. And it's things like I was in Barcelona at this one weekend in February, and why was I there? Well, you went to Mobile World Congress. And, it was just, you could kind of walk down and really define a profile of me based on knowing nothing other than location data over 30 days.
Yeah, that's that's really interesting, right? They I don't know if you know a company called Concur. They do their travel. They're like Carson Wiggett or whatever the other company is. They're real big.
Yeah.
But they bought TripIt a couple of years ago.
Right.
So they own TripIt now, and if your company signs up for Concur, your employees get TripIt. And they were saying, someone was saying, I don't remember where I saw this. I think it was on The Verge or somewhere. But they were talking about they give it away free because they like to know where people are and what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's a great way for them to track where the users are going. I mean, they know from where you're buying a ticket, but once you get into TripIt, people keep adding all this extra stuff there, so they start building a profile around you.
Yeah.
And then they can sell that to Hilton or whatever.
Yeah.
And you start getting ads to go to the Hilton in Hawaii for some reason.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's funny. I mean, one of the things, and you've been in this market for a while, and there's a part of me that is sort of profoundly sad that all this really great technology is being used to like push some ad.
Yeah. Well.
But on the other hand, that's a part of the business. I think there's a part of the business that's there. There's a huge amount of utility. I think you've been obviously more involved, I think, in the GIS business, but I think that's also going to be a real interesting thing. So I think businesses are really going to start using location much more effectively going forward. And I wouldn't want to offend anyone in Redlands, but that market is still pretty nascent, I think. I think there's a lot more that can happen in that whole market. So.
Yeah, and this, they have this quote. We always bring this up about once a year. Everything is, there's 80% of the world's information is spatial. It's like, no, it's not, right? Literally everything has location tied to it. It's hard to find something that somehow isn't tied to either a location or about a location or about something that happened at a location.
Well, there was a guy, and I think I want to give credit to, I think Ventana Research was the name, but I'm not sure that's right. But they did something where they looked at how enterprises in business intelligence used location data, and something like 89% of enterprises which said they did use location-based data in their business intelligence used Excel spreadsheets to do it. And so, and they weren't very happy with it, believe it or not. And so, what it says is there's just a lot of people, and, the example, it was interesting, I read that, and my daughter, little diversion, but my daughter graduated from college and she was looking for a job with a marketing company, and as part of the interview process they sent her this data set that was like 30 rows by 2,500 columns and asked her to crunch it about marketing stuff. And it was interesting because she knew how to do that because she'd taken this sports econometrics class and she knew how to do that, and so she did it, and things went well. And I thought, we don't have Excel user conferences where we all get together and say, hey, Excel user conference, but everyone, if you've had that training, you know how to use Excel. It's a tool, and I think as you look at a future where there's a lot more information that has data attached, or location data attached to it, the tools to use that will become more obvious to people like my daughter, who doesn't consider, frankly, she wouldn't be watching this, I don't think. I guess watch it. But and she wouldn't consider it geo anything. She wouldn't go to FOSS 4G. She wouldn't go to state of the map. She's just someone who's doing her job, and a geo tool would be an interesting thing. And I think that's where making it available to those people. Now you're not talking about how am I cutting into Esri's market, because Esri isn't touching those guys. Now you're talking about a whole new market that's much, much bigger. And I think that's where the guys like Mapbox, I think, have a great opportunity. And CartoDB, by the way, I think they're doing great work too.
Yeah, but I don't know if you saw the first episode, 3 weeks ago, Brian Timoney, he said if he had to go back and do it all again, he would create an Excel food truck and just drive it around to office parks to do Excel work, because he thinks that's that's where the big money is.
Pivot table. I've never really gotten very comfortable with pivot tables, but
no, but if you know how to do, if people in my office know how to do that, and I'm like, can you set this up for me? Once I have it, I can use it. It's like I could do this in a database, but how do you do this in Excel? But Excel is the database of the world.
And I guess it is, and people know how to use it, and they don't. I think you start to move. So my daughter, not to belabor my daughter, but she actually works now for a company that does marketing on social media, and so they get huge data sets with all kinds of information. And guess what the new columns, 2 columns are on that, latitude and longitude, right? And so they're starting to, their data is getting latitude and longitude attached to it. They kind of look at it and, hide those 2 columns for now, but that's not going to be for long, right? They're going to sit there and try and figure out what to do with that and what that means and how to improve the effectiveness of the campaign. So there what you've got is you've got people who don't consider themselves paleo or neo or whatever, geo whatevers. They're just 25-year-olds who are working and want to go out and get a beer after work, but they use tools. And those tools, I think, are where some of these, I think that's where the real opportunity is going to be to really expand the market.
Yeah, I've noticed, at least here in Phoenix, that companies like Tableau, their users are starting to come to our geospatial meetups because they don't really care about GIS, but they care about location. So they come to try and learn about how to use OpenStreetMap or how to use, some of these OGR tools and Goodall tools.
Yeah.
And so they're coming in because they're just trying to answer simple questions. They're not trying to figure out how to find how many hectares of some threatened endangered species overlays some other area of concern. They just, a lot of times it is X and Y. And that's good enough for them, but it's just like we had a meetup, Phoenix Geo meetup here a couple months ago, and I would say over half the people were Tableau, that they've just, their user group found our user group, and they're all coming to learn.
Yeah. And that's exactly the type of thing. And so I think, that's, I guess, why I remain fairly positive about it. Every once in a while I think, I'm going to go do something else. I don't know.
Nah, you
but it's I think there's still a lot of interesting stuff to be done, and like I say, plus I think the other thing's great about the industry is while it's gotten to be an incredibly horizontal industry, right? It touches everything. On the other hand, it sometimes feels like a fairly small village. It's like, oh, guy, I'm seeing that guy again. I worked with him 3 times before. So, did I tell you last time about my
or it's
game?
when you do Google.
Someone would do this. I have this this game in my head, and it's like the 6 degrees of separation for Kevin Bacon. But so the question is, who is the Kevin Bacon of Geo? Who's the person that within like a few degrees of separation everyone has either worked with or worked for or something like that? And I don't know who it is. At various times I've had different candidates. But who's the person, that everyone goes, when you say, James, oh yeah, I worked with James so-and-so or something like that.
There's a
so
couple
anyway,
people.
That's a contest. Yeah. Who's the Kevin Bacon of Geo?
Oh man, there's a bunch of people. It's funny. There's certain areas, right? I mean, there's certain people that just keep showing up. There's certain people that, they've worked for so many companies that they are, without a doubt.
And it's you have to work in the right companies. It's like companies that when I first thought of the idea, it was actually a group that sounds weird now, but if you had worked at Motorola, Rand McNally, and Navtech, 10 years ago, you'd probably met everybody in the geo industry. I don't know if I'd use those same 3 groups now, but anyway, so there's a homework assignment. Who's the Kevin Bacon of geo?
Yeah,
Maybe trending on Twitter.
Ian White. Let's just put Ian White down as the Kevin Bacon.
Kevin, yeah, that's right. Maybe that's yeah. We could do a Quora question. Is Ian White the Kevin Bacon of geo?
Is he self-aware? Well, he probably thinks he's the Kevin Bacon of Geo. I mean, that would be Ian White.
We'll see if we can get it trending by the time he comes down from the monastery on some snow-covered peak in Nepal or wherever he is.
Well, maybe he's going to have a drone come down and do this for him. Hey, did you see the wedding proposal done by drone? Did you see that?
No.
So some guy takes his wife out to the park. They sit down on a bench, this is the start of any wedding proposal that comes that way, and they're sitting there and they're talking, and he's telling her how much he loves her, and all of a sudden this drone comes down and kind of appears right in front of them, and she kind of looks at it, and I guess I couldn't tell if he tells her or something, that she looks at it and it says, "Will you marry me?" and there's the ring. All of a sudden here.
I was reading something and someone was saying about, pretty soon someone will have a drone filming their kid's soccer match. I'm like,
That's so 2014. I mean, we were doing that in Palo Alto last year. So
Yeah, no, it's the
I think they're
drones
pretty
are.
fun. I have a small drone. I really want to get a big one, but I have like no reason to spend the money on it. So anyone looking for a Christmas present, sign me up.
So what are you drone? So what are you droning?
Oh, I just fly it around. I just fly it around. But it's interesting. I was actually at a wedding. I was talking to the photographer, and I mean, if you're a photographer, um, they all have them. And I don't know if you're following, but I mean, the rules for drones are kind of coming out in dribs and drabs from the FAA and the
Yeah.
White House and all that kind of stuff. And uh, um, right now they have a fairly limited set of allowances. I think there are 4 companies, unless it's expanded more recently. I think Trimble and Wolpert and 2 others are allowed to do commercial flying of drones. But that's I think that whole continuum. I mean, I think imagery is an interesting space right now, and I think that whole continuum from satellite, microsatellite, aerial drones. It's just is going to be a real interesting area of evolution, both in terms of the imagery capture, and then the whole other part that's coming out is, once you get that imagery, how do you deliver it? Because historically they've been pretty crappy at that, and then what analytics can you do on it, which seems to be the part that gets everyone fired up. The new I'm going to give you a coupon when you walk by Starbucks is I'm going to do aerial imagery analytics and sell it to hedge funds. It's always hedge funds. Hedge funds
They pay for it. They buy anything, like, right?
They're rich. They're in New York. They probably don't understand technology. We'll sell it to them.
That's
the example I always hear. We're going to sell it to hedge funds.
I was in Denver, and I went to this. What was it? It was some sort of meetup. It wasn't a geospatial meetup, but the reason I went to it was about drones. And there was a guy there, and he was doing this thing about how it was a drone for because the wildfires were big in Colorado, and it was how to film and take sensor readings of wildfires. And he was describing the process through this PowerPoint. He's like, yeah, so we had this, big drone, not a professional, well, as big as a, what do you call it, a professional amateur drone, one of those bigger ones, but they cost a couple $1,000s. And so it's got the GoPro on it. They started loading these sensors up on it, and they said, oh, we need Wi-Fi. So they put a Wi-Fi, router on it with some sort of satellite thing. And he goes, once we were done with it, we realized it was too heavy to fly.
Well, I think the key step is you've got to be able to pull a GoPro camera up, and below that they have these cheapo cameras, but I mean, they're pretty nice. They're sort of in the $1,000 range. So I don't know. I really want one, but I can't think of why.
I still, if let's say you said, hey James, here's 10 grand, I would go out and buy a 3D printer right now. I don't know why I want one, but if I need to print a toothpick, if I need a toothpick and I can't find one, I can print one.
Well, so I have a video so my kids gave me one. It's not a big one. It's a small, sort of $100 one. And on Christmas Day, I have this little video, and you see it flying. All of a sudden, it stops, and then you see like shaking around. And then the next thing is me with this big, those tree saws trying to shake. That was my Christmas Day, was trying to get my drone out of a tree.
They're harder to control than you think.
Well, for the cheap ones, because you actually have to fly them. For the expensive ones, they're not, because you just kind of draw it out on your iPad and they fly around.
They go up to a certain height. Yeah, because they got the X, the Y, the Z, and you're like, I'm used to like a car, right? Left and right, forward and back, and this has like a, not even a Z. It's like 100 or 360 degrees of motion, and all of a sudden the thing's like this, and all of a sudden you're upside down, and.
Anyway,
good thing I didn't put my son on it.
Some reason to get one. I need to get something I can write off. Don't tell the IRS.
Well.
Okay, are we done here, James?
I think we're done. I think we've gone an hour. Thank you for joining. As always, it's fun to talk about more of the business aspect than the technical aspect.
Well, I appreciate you letting me talk about the business, because the technical aspect wouldn't have my interpretation of the technical aspects wouldn't have impressed your audience. So always fun.
Well, this year I'm trying to keep it simple with people who talk about technical things I understand about, because 2 years ago I got some people on that were talking about like remote sensing and little sensors you put on buses and things like that. They're talking about the communication protocol, and I'm just kind of like, okay. Next week, But next week we do have the great Ian White. He is
Great
supposed
Ian
to be
White.
back from Nepal. He is disappointed he couldn't be the first episode of season 3. He wanted me to actually wait until he got back, but time waits for no man, even Ian White. So same time, same place, same URL, same
All those things.
Twitter account. Yeah, I was gonna say same bat channel, but that just so dates me that I don't want to admit that I actually watch TV.
There you go.
Thank you, Mark, as always. You take care. Have a great weekend. Everybody, enjoy your weekend. And for those of us living out in the West where it's beautiful, hit a ball game. Goes back east. Tough luck, baby. Tough luck. Bye.
Go A's.